The query store is one of the most powerful database scope features in SQL Server, capturing a history of executed query, runtime execution statistics, execution plan against a specific database. You can consider this like the black box of SQL Server. This information can be used for troubleshooting performance and improving the stability of your database workloads. In SQL Server 2022, the query store is enabled by default for all newly created databases to help customers better track performance history, troubleshoot query plan related issues, and enable new query processor capabilities. Another great thing about the query store in SQL Server 2022 is that you can enable it on secondary replicas. Using the query store may help you in the following scenarios, such as to quickly find and fix a planned performance regression by forcing the previous query plan. Fix queries that have recently regressed in performance due to execution plan changes. You can also use it to determine the number of times a query was executed in a given window. This will help you as a DBA in troubleshooting performance resource problems. You can also use it to identify top queries by execution time, memory consumption, and so forth within the past X hours. You can use it to audit the history of query plans for a given query. Analyze resources for CPU, I/O, and memory usage patterns for a particular database. You can identify top queries that are waiting on resources, and it will definitely help you understand the waiting nature for a particular query plan. Let's take a look at how you can set up your query store if it is not enabled, and we're going to look at some of the properties. To enable the query store in a database, right-click on the database, select Properties, and then scroll down to the Query Store section. Let me maximize the screen. On the first tab, you have the operation mode. You can change this mode and is controlled by this operation mode here. So currently, the Query Store is in a half mode. We can switch it to read only or read write. So in this case, we want to set it to read write mode. If you have a situation where the Query Store is full, then it will be changed to a read-only mode. Under the monitoring section, you have data flush interval minutes. The data flush interval defines the frequency before collected runtime statistics are persisted to disk. By default, this is set to 15 minutes. If this option is set to a lower value than the frequency of flushes, data from the memory to the disk will occur often, which will have a negative impact on the SQL Server instance. But if you increase the value, more SQL Server query store information will be placed in memory of the SQL Server instance before it is flushed to disk, which in case of like a restart, then you're at risk of losing data. The second option under the monitoring is the statistics collection interval. This option defines aggregated interval of query runtime statistics that should be used inside of SQL Server query store. By default, it is set to 60 minutes. A lower value means that granularity of the runtime statistics is finer. Because of that, more interval occurs, which requires more disk space after storing runtime statistics. Keep in mind that arbitrary values are not allowed. So if you expand, you'll see the list of options available to you. The other important parameter we want to take a look at is the maximum size under the query store retention. The default size in SQL Server is 1000 megabytes. The data in the query store is stored within the database where the query store is enabled. So by default, the query store doesn't allow auto grow, and once the query store reaches its maximum value, operation mode switch to read only. A new execution plan and runtime statistics will not be collected. So if this happens, you can manually extend the query store or purge the data. The maximum plans per query limits the number of stored plans. By default, this value is 200. If the maximum value reaches 200, then the query store stops capturing new plan for that query. Setting it to 0 removes the limitation with regards to the number of captured plans. For the query store capture mode, we have 3 options. We have auto, none, and custom, and you also can set the all option. So what the query store capture mode does is that it determines what type of query will be captured by the query store. The default mode, which is set to auto, will try and ignore infrequent queries, and queries with insignificant compile and execution duration are ignored. When it is set to none, The query store stops capturing new queries. The custom option allows additional control and the capability to fine-tune the data collection policy. The size-based auto cleanup mode is for cleaning up SQL Server query store data when the maximum size option reaches to 90% of its capacity. The cleanup process will remove oldest data and less expensive query data. The cleanup process stops when 80% of the maximum size in megabytes option is reached. By default, this option is set to auto, however, you can turn it off. For the stale query threshold, which is specified in days, defines how long the data will stay in the query store. By default, it is 30 days and you can set it to whatever you want. However, you want to avoid keeping historical data you don't plan to use. This practice will reduce your chances of the query store going in read-only status. So these are some of the key parameters that you need to understand for the query store. So now let's take a look at the reports that are available under the query store of the database. So select OK to exit this screen. So to access the reports from the query store, expand the database, then expand query store. Here you have 7 reports under the query store that you can examine to monitor performance and troubleshooting. So the first one is the regress queries. We don't have any data in the database now, so it will be empty. So let's execute some queries on the database to get some data within the query store. Now let's go back to the query store. So one of the reports that we can check now to view data is the top resource consumption queries. So let's view top resource consumption queries. And on the main dashboard, we'll see an overview. So you'll see a list of queries that takes up top resources, right? So in this case, I don't have much data, so not much will be shown. Here you'll see multiple plan IDs. You could select the query plan and then you'll see a different execution plan generated here. If you see a better plan, then you could always choose to force plan query, right? And then you just select yes. You also have the options to compare plans side by side by selecting the plans that you want to compare and then selecting this icon here. You can also view the queries by different metrics such as the CPU time under the metrics filter. Now if we take a look at the weight statistics report, we should be seeing some data as well, because it will keep track of the buffer I/O as well as the network I/O. So you can filter based on average wait time, maximum wait time, so on and so forth. And you also still have the option on this window to do a comparison of execution plans. So the query store is really a powerful feature for SQL Server users to keep track of query execution time and query execution plan for monitoring and analyzing performance of queries.